The moment I stepped into the Callaway Gallery's grand opening gala, conversations faltered, and heads turned. I wore vintage Chanel, a deliberate choice. The same designer Victoria Callaway had worn the night she told me I had provincial talent and rejected my collection. 7 years later, I watched her champagne glass freeze midway to her lips as recognition dawned. Her gallery was now my gallery, though she wouldn't learn that particular detail for another hour. Olivia Montgomery, she breathed, composing herself quickly. What an unexpected surprise. Victoria, I replied with a smile that revealed nothing of the satisfaction coursing through me. I wouldn't have missed this for the world. The confusion in her eyes was delicious. Why would the artist she'd so publicly dismissed return to celebrate her triumph? But Victoria had always excelled at maintaining appearances. She kissed the air beside my cheek and moved on to greet other guests, though I noticed her gaze returning to me repeatedly throughout the evening. She had no idea that I wasn't just attending her gallery opening. I was orchestrating its final act. 7 years earlier, I had been a promising young artist, fresh out of graduate school. My mixed media work had caught the attention of several smaller galleries, and when Victoria Callaway, the most influential gallery owner in the city, requested a meeting, it felt like destiny. Victoria represented artists who went on to international acclaim. Her endorsement could launch careers overnight. I spent weeks preparing my portfolio, selecting pieces that showcased both technical skill and conceptual depth. The morning of our meeting, I arrived at Callaway's original gallery space downtown, a converted warehouse with soaring ceilings and perfect light. Victoria kept me waiting for 45 minutes before her assistant led me into her minimalist office. What followed was not the career discussion I had anticipated, but a calculated humiliation. Victoria flipped through my portfolio with increasing impatience, occasionally making dismissive sounds. Finally, she closed it and slid it back across her desk. "Your technique is adequate," she said, "but these lack vision. There's nothing here that hasn't been done before, and better." She sighed, as though my mediocrity personally exhausted her. "You have provincial talent, Miss Montgomery. Perhaps that would be enough in a smaller market. But here," she gestured vaguely at the window, "at the city beyond, here, we require exceptional." I left with my portfolio clutched to my chest, my face burning. But worse was to come. Somehow, Victoria's assessment became common knowledge in the art community. Galleries that had previously expressed interest now returned my calls with polite rejections. A review of a group show where I exhibited a single piece mentioned my technically proficient but uninspired work, confirming Callaway's recent assessment. In one afternoon, Victoria had effectively ended my career before it had truly begun. Not because my work lacked merit, but because she could. Because power in the art world was currency. And Victoria enjoyed spending hers. I retreated to my tiny studio apartment, alternating between despair and rage. For 2 weeks, I barely slept or ate. Then one morning, I woke with startling clarity. If I couldn't succeed as the artist I'd imagined being, I would become something else entirely. First, I took a job at a commercial art consulting firm that placed artwork in corporate offices and hotels. It wasn't glamorous, but it provided stability and, more importantly, connections. I learned how the business side of art functioned, the financials behind galleries, the relationships between collectors and institutions, the market forces that determined value. Meanwhile, I continued creating art under a pseudonym, Alexander Reed. I developed a style distinct from my previous work, bolder, more provocative, with a hint of satire of the art world itself. Without the burden of my own rejected name, I found a new freedom. Alexander's pieces began appearing in small galleries, receiving positive attention. 3 years in, I made a crucial connection through my consulting work. Elena Walsh, a wealthy widow with an exceptional art collection and a personal grudge against Victoria Callaway, who had once dismissed her late husband's collection as new money with no taste. Over lunches and gallery visits, Elena and I developed a friendship based on mutual appreciation. And eventually, mutual purpose. Victoria's overextended herself with this new gallery space, Elena mentioned during one of our meetings. The location is prime, but the renovation costs were astronomical. She's been approaching several investors, including some old friends of mine. This casual comment became the seed of what would follow. With Elena's guidance, I began investigating Victoria's financial situation. The prestigious Callaway Gallery, it seemed, was built on increasingly shaky ground. Victoria had leveraged her existing properties to finance her ambitious new flagship location, a renovated historic building in the Arts District. Elena introduced me to other collectors and investors who had their own reasons to distrust Victoria, artists she had abandoned when more marketable options came along, partners she had undermined, collectors she had misled about provenance or value. Carefully, methodically, we formed a consortium, pooling resources to acquire the loans Victoria had taken out. During this time, Alexander Reed's reputation continued to grow. A solo show at a respected mid-tier gallery sold out. Critics noted his refreshing perspective and incisive commentary on artistic valuation. Victoria, always alert to emerging talent she could profit from, sent her assistant to approach Alexander about representation. I declined, through an intermediary, citing scheduling conflicts. The irony was almost too perfect. For years after Victoria had dismissed my work, I had accumulated enough capital, financial, social, and artistic, to execute the final phase of my plan. Our consortium, officially named Meridian Arts Investment but composed of individuals Victoria had alienated over the years, acquired controlling interests in the property company that owned Victoria's new gallery building. Simultaneously, we purchased the majority of her outstanding loans, just as the expenses for the grand opening were peaking. Victoria, always more concerned with appearances than financial details, had no idea that her creditors had changed. She was too focused on ensuring that the Callaway Gallery's grand reopening would cement her status as the city's premier art powerhouse. Which brings us back to opening night. With Victoria circulating among wealthy collectors and influential critics, unaware that everything was about to change. An hour into the event, just after Victoria had finished her speech thanking her partners and supporters, Elena nodded to me. It was time. I approached Victoria as she stood alone, briefly surveying her domain. A spectacular space, I commented, gesturing at the vaulted ceilings and dramatic lighting. You must be very proud. It's exceeded even my expectations, she agreed, unable to resist a moment of genuine pleasure, the perfect showcase for truly exceptional talent. Yes, I said, that's what we thought too. Her eyes narrowed at the we, sensing something beneath my words. I'm sorry, Meridian Arts Investment, I clarified. We're very pleased with how you've developed the property. The slight tightening around her eyes was the only indication that she recognized the name of her new creditor. You're with Meridian? I wasn't aware they sent representatives to openings. Oh, I'm not just a representative, I replied, keeping my voice conversational. I'm the managing partner. We acquired your building loans last year, and as of this week, we own a controlling interest in this property. I took a sip of champagne, enjoying the rare sight of Victoria Callaway at a loss for words. I wanted to deliver our decision personally. We're making some changes to the gallery program, effective immediately. Victoria regained her composure quickly. I had to admire her for that. Whatever changes you're planning will have to wait. I have a 5-year lease and a full exhibition calendar. Actually, your financing agreement includes a change of ownership clause with remarkably flexible terms for the creditor, I said. Your attention to detail has always been more aesthetic than contractual, hasn't it? The color drained from her face as understanding dawned. You can't just walk in, Anne. We're not walking in, Victoria. We've been here all along, waiting for the investments to mature. I handed her an envelope I'd been carrying in my clutch. These are the terms of our new arrangement. You'll be staying on in a curatorial capacity, but major decisions will require board approval, our board. She snatched the envelope, her face flushed. Who exactly is behind this? Hammond? The Wilsons? Which of my competitors put you up to this power play? I smiled, the moment I had imagined for years finally arriving. No competitor, Victoria, just someone who once showed you a portfolio that you deemed provincial. Recognition flickered in her eyes, followed by disbelief. This is about that? A business critique from years ago? My God, the pettiness. Not petty, I corrected her, strategic. You taught me an invaluable lesson that day. Art isn't just about talent, it's about power, who has it, who doesn't, and what happens when those positions reverse. I glanced around the gallery, filled with influential people who would soon learn about the change in leadership. I believe the first exhibition under new management will be opening in 6 weeks, a debut solo show by Alexander Reed. Victoria's eyes widened. You're the artist? The artist you dismissed, I confirmed, and the owner who just acquired your gallery. Life does have a certain symmetry, doesn't it? The remainder of the evening unfolded like a choreographed performance. Victoria maintained a brittle smile as my consortium partners gradually revealed themselves to key guests. By midnight, the narrative had shifted. The powerful Callaway Gallery was now under new management, with a focus on supporting diverse voices in the art world. In the months that followed, Victoria adapted to her reduced role with as much grace as her nature allowed. The gallery, renamed Montgomery Contemporary, built a reputation for discovering exceptional talent overlooked by more established institutions. Alexander Reed's exhibition was a critical and commercial success, though I eventually retired the pseudonym, having made my point. Victoria and I developed a working relationship based on mutual respect. If not warmth, she had an undeniable eye for talent when not clouded by power dynamics, and I had learned enough about the business to value genuine expertise. 3 years after the takeover, at the opening of an exhibition featuring young artists from underserved communities, Victoria approached me at the bar. "It's a strong show," she said, no trace of condescension in her voice. "That piece in the East Gallery, the textile installation, the artist has something special. I thought you'd appreciate that one," I replied. "She reminds me a bit of myself at that age." Victoria studied me over the rim of her glass. "Would you have built all this without me? Without what I said to you?" I considered the question seriously. I would have been a different artist, perhaps a successful one in conventional terms, but this, I gestured around us at the thriving gallery, the diverse crowd of artists and patrons, this required understanding how power actually works in our world. "So, in a way, I should thank you." She smiled thinly. "You're welcome, though I prefer this method of gratitude to the alternative." That night, after the guests had departed, I walked through the quiet gallery, considering the journey from that humiliating rejection to this moment. The victory was not in the acquisition itself, nor in Victoria's diminished status, but in the space we had created, one where talent could be recognized regardless of pedigree or connections. Last week, a young artist came to my office, nervous and clutching a portfolio, similar to the one I had once presented to Victoria. Her work was raw but showed remarkable promise. "I'm not sure if it's good enough," she said, watching anxiously as I reviewed her pieces. "My professor said I should try smaller galleries first, work my way up." I closed the portfolio and handed it back to her. "Your professor is operating on an outdated assumption that gatekeepers determine value. Your work has vision and technical skill. More importantly, it has something to say. We'd be honored to include 2 pieces in our Emerging Artists exhibition next month." The look of stunned joy on her face reminded me why I had built Montgomery Contemporary, not just as a vehicle for personal vindication, but as a reimagining of what an art institution could be. Power in the art world is still currency, but now, I spend mine differently than Victoria did. Each time we elevate an overlooked voice or challenge established hierarchies, it compounds, the most satisfying return on investment, change. As for Victoria, she's still part of the gallery, though in a capacity that requires her to mentor rather than judge. Sometimes, I catch her watching me with a look that suggests she's still trying to reconcile the dismissed artist with the businesswoman who outmaneuvered her. I don't mind. Some lessons take longer to learn than others. And the portfolio she rejected? I had it rebound in leather and displayed in my office, not as a reminder of rejection, but as evidence that endings are rarely what they appear to be. Sometimes, they're just the first brushstroke on a much larger canvas.